You missed a spot. The words cracked through the air like a whip. Loretta James froze, her gloved hands still gripping the damp rag, the faint smell of pine cleaner curling upward from the polished banister. She turned slowly, already knowing what she'd see. Margaret Hensley was standing in the doorway of the grand lobby, her fur-collared coat draped over her narrow shoulders like a crown on a ruler. Her silver-blonde hair was sculpted into a perfect twist, her lipstick a shade too sharp for morning. She held herself with the kind of poise that told the world she was never wrong. Loretta forced her voice to stay steady. I just finished that railing, ma'am. Margaret took 2 deliberate steps closer, her heels clicking against the marble. Then your standards are clearly lower than mine. She pointed to a faint smear on the brass. Do you think the tenants here pay $4,000 a month to walk past this? Loretta looked at the smear, so small it could have been a shadow, then back at Margaret. It's clean, she said quietly, but I'll go over it again. Of course you will. Margaret's eyes lingered on her headscarf, on the faded sleeves of her uniform shirt, on the sturdy work shoes that had walked too many miles. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. And when you're done, you might consider using the service entrance from now on. The main lobby is for residents and guests, not. She let the sentence trail, as if the ending were too obvious, or too ugly, to speak aloud. Loretta felt the words settle on her skin, heavy and cold. Not what, Mrs. Hensley? Margaret tilted her head, feigning surprise. Oh, don't make this into something it's not. I'm simply preserving the building's image. People talk. And when they see, she let her gaze sweep over Loretta again, slow and surgical. Certain things, they form impressions. Loretta swallowed hard, the metallic taste of anger rising in her mouth. I come here to work. I do my job. I keep this place clean. And I'm telling you, Margaret said, stepping close enough for Loretta to smell the expensive perfume beneath the frost in her tone, cleaning isn't enough. Not when the sight of you undoes the work you've done. The words landed like a slap, but Loretta didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago that flinching was what people like Margaret fed on. Instead, she took a slow breath, then nodded. I'll go over the railing again. Margaret smiled, thin, victorious, and stepped back. Good. And Loretta? Yes, ma'am. Try to be less visible. With that, she turned and swept toward the elevator, her coat brushing against the polished marble. Loretta watched her go, the rag still clenched in her hand, the smell of brass polish sharp in her nose. She'd been insulted before, dismissed before, but there was something in Margaret's tone, that smooth blend of condescension and venom, that burrowed deeper. It wasn't just about the railing, or the lobby, or even the job. It was about being told, in so many carefully chosen words, that her presence was a flaw to be hidden. Loretta turned back to the railing and began to polish again, her movements slow and deliberate. She wasn't just wiping away the smear. She was making a silent promise. One day, Margaret Hensley would see her. And when that day came, it wouldn't be on Margaret's terms. The vacuum's low hum echoed faintly off the third-floor hallway walls, blending with the smell of fresh carpet cleaner. Loretta pushed the machine forward in smooth, practiced lines, eyes fixed ahead. She'd been working at Crestwood Manor for 6 months now. 6 months of scrubbing, dusting, mopping, and 6 months of enduring Margaret Hensley's icy rituals. Most days, she managed to let the comments roll off. She'd learned to answer with quiet nods, to keep her voice soft, to never let her hands still in Margaret's presence. But some mornings, like today, the air in the building seemed to cling to her, heavy with unspoken judgment. Stop that. The words came sharp from behind her. Loretta turned, the vacuum's cord curling at her feet. Margaret stood at the far end of the hall, arms crossed, a single sheet of paper pinched between her fingers like it was contaminated. What is this? Margaret's voice cut through the quiet. Loretta set the vacuum aside and walked toward her. I don't know, ma'am. Margaret held the paper out. It was a printed notice, the kind she'd seen tacked to tenant doors before, but this one had her name scrawled across the top in neat, black ink. It read, Property Management Complaint Form, Unauthorized Behavior. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Someone claims you've been loitering, sitting in the lobby during your shift. Talking too much to residents. Loretta's mouth tightened. I've never sat in the lobby unless I'm waiting for a tenant to open a door for me. And the only time I speak to residents is when they speak to me. Margaret's expression didn't shift. So you're calling the complainant a liar? I'm saying it didn't happen. The air between them felt thick enough to touch. Margaret's gaze traveled over Loretta slowly, lingering again on her headscarf, her uniform, the faded photo of a smiling teenage girl tucked into the plastic ID badge clipped to her pocket. Do you know what makes this place different from other properties in this neighborhood, Loretta? Loretta didn't answer. It's that our residents feel they live among their own kind, Margaret said, her voice almost conversational. People who share the same values, the same standards. It's part of what they pay for. Loretta's jaw tightened. And I don't fit that picture? Margaret's smile was faint, but her words were clean and sharp. Let's just say you bring contrast. Not all contrast is flattering. Loretta felt the sting, but her voice stayed even. I do my work. I respect this building and the people in it. That's all that should matter. Margaret stepped closer, lowering her voice to a murmur only Loretta could hear. That's where you're wrong. Here, how you look matters as much as what you do. Maybe more. From somewhere down the hall, a door clicked softly. Neither woman turned, but the sound carried, and it wasn't the sound of someone leaving. It was the sound of someone listening. Margaret slid the complaint form into Loretta's hand as though it were a gift. Take care of this, she said, before turning on her heel and disappearing around the corner. Loretta stared at the paper, the ink blurring slightly under the bright hallway lights. She knew this was just another tactic. A way to keep her off balance, to remind her of her place. She also knew there was no point in fighting the accusation head-on. Not yet. She folded the paper neatly and slid it into her pocket. What she didn't know, what Margaret didn't know, was that the man standing quietly in the recessed doorway halfway down the hall had heard every word. Caleb Hensley pressed his shoulder against the wall, the chipped paint cool through the fabric of his sweatshirt. He hadn't meant to be here, not exactly. He'd come back to Crestwood 3 nights ago, moving into one of the unused units while figuring out his next step after leaving college. He hadn't planned on seeing his mother so soon, let alone watching her try to cut a woman down with the precision of a surgeon. He stayed in the doorway until Loretta turned back to her vacuum, moving slowly now, her shoulders squared against the weight of something he couldn't quite name. Only when the hum started again did he step out, hands deep in his pockets, his mind already turning over what he'd just heard. Margaret had always been like this, or maybe she'd grown sharper in his absence. Either way, he recognized the tone, the subtle way she used politeness as a weapon. What surprised him was Loretta's stillness, the way she absorbed the hit without flinching. By the time he made it back to his apartment, he knew 2 things. First, this wasn't going to be the last time he saw his mother try to push her out. And second, for reasons he couldn't yet explain, he didn't want to let her. The next morning broke with a thin light that made the brick of Crestwood look colder than it was. The service door stuck on the 3rd step the way it always did, and when Caleb lifted while he pulled, the hinge sighed as if grateful someone remembered its quirk. He almost missed her at first, tucked into the corner of the back stair, shoulders angled to catch what little warmth the building leaked from a vent above the door. Steam curled from the plastic container in her lap, a ribbon of cumin and onion and something richer that reminded him of the kind of comfort that does not come in a paper cup. He told himself he was only cutting through to the basement laundry. His voice came quiet so it would not bounce off the concrete. He told her he would be quick and that he did not mean to bother her. She looked up long enough to register the shape of him and then returned her attention to the food with the kind of calm that either came from practice or choice. Her spoon moved deliberately, not because she had time to waste but because she refused to chew like she was afraid someone would take the next bite away. The basement door sticks on the 3rd step, she said, saving him from the awkwardness of explaining what he already knew. Lift while you pull, not after. He thanked her and started past, then stopped because the smell reached into an old hunger he had ignored so long it had learned to be quiet. He said it smelled better than anything he had eaten in days and immediately felt foolish for admitting it. She said it was just leftovers, which somehow made it sound like abundance rather than scraps. When he joked that if there was more he would be able to find it because he had hidden half the building's good things as a kid, she tipped her face to see him properly and drew a quick conclusion with no visible effort. "You Margaret's boy." He admitted that it depended on the day. That small truth hung between them long enough to be acknowledged by both, and then she lowered her gaze back to the container and took another measured bite. The basement called to him with the thump of washers and the soft slap of wet cloth against metal. He could have gone. He did not. He thought of the complaint form, the word contrast used like a bruise, the way she had stood with her shoulders squared against a blow she had already factored into her day. He turned around and finished a thought he had not given himself permission to say in a long time. "I heard her yesterday," he said. "In the hallway. I heard every word." She did not pretend not to know what she meant. The lid clicked softly as she set the spoon on it. Her eyes waited for him to decide whether he needed his apology more than she needed her peace. He told her he was sorry for the way his mother spoke, for the way she would try again, for the way she disliked stewardship. Loretta listened like a person who had seen apologies offered to the air for the relief of the speaker. When she answered, her voice carried neither bitterness nor relief, only the shape of a useful thought. "People talk when they feel powerful," she said. "They do not always mean the words so much as they like the sound of themselves saying them." He said that sounded generous. She said it was workable. He smiled because workable was the kind of word that showed up when luxury had been scrapped from your vocabulary and replaced with necessity. He asked the thing he had no real right to ask, which was why she stayed. She did not rush the answer. She set the container aside, folded her hands, and let him see the winter's work on her knuckles. She told him rent does not pay itself, that a niece eats, that bills wait for no one, that leaving on Margaret's terms would teach the wrong lesson, and that sometimes the cleanest thing a person can do is hold their ground and make time do the work that shouting cannot. He felt unnecessary and exactly in the right place at the same time. He said if more forms appeared with her name scrawled across the top he wanted to know. She asked what he would do knowing. He told her he would start there and make it harder for lies to move through the building like air. She studied him openly. He did not fidget. She said they would see, because some fights improve with witnesses and others just draw more blood. He told her he would lift on the third step. He did. Machines thumped, something dripped in a rhythm that felt older than his time away, and he stood in that damp concrete pause long enough to choose to go back outside and keep speaking rather than leave and pretend this was not his to carry. By the time he returned, the steam had thinned and Loretta had finished, the container empty, the staircase as clean as if she had eaten invisibly. He found her again in 3B, where a red crescent had sunk into the nap of the carpet like memory. She was kneeling with the patience of a person who had learned stains surrender to persistence more readily than they do to expensive promises. He watched the way her arm worked, weight through the heel of her hand, breath measured as if she were matching herself to the pace of the task rather than demanding it meet hers. When she sat back to breathe, he stepped forward and said the first practical thing that came to mind, which was that he would steal her line about club soda, pressure, and opportunity. "You can have it," she said, pushing to her feet with the small honesty of a person who does not pretend her joints are endlessly forgiving. She took him in again and labeled him correctly for the second time. "If you are here for your mother, she is in the office counting reasons she is never wrong." "I am here for you," he said, and watched the way the sentence landed and slid. He adjusted without defensiveness. "I am here because I want to be useful." She asked if he could reset a vacuum when the belt slipped. He said he could learn. She told him usefulness starts there. He crouched beside the cart and opened the machine with the kind of attention he had not given a physical object in too long. The belt logic yielded to his fingers, more because he refused to be insulted by a simple mechanism than because he had any natural genius for repairs. When the motor thrummed and the brush rolled, she gave him a small, dry commendation that felt like a rung on a ladder rather than a pat on the head. They worked together for the rest of the morning without declaring it a partnership. In 2A, he reached a casserole dish down from a shelf where grief had placed it out of reach, and handed it back like it carried a person rather than a recipe. The talk between tasks did not feel like chatter. It felt like the slow exchange of the information people need to be less alone. He learned that Loretta's niece, Tasha, was 16, fast with pencil and geometry, and relentless about shading cheekbones until they held light like skin. He learned Loretta avoided coffee because it made her heart knock too hard, but she liked her tea dark enough to make a spoon stand up. He learned she could look at a bathroom counter and tell which tenant had grown up sharing and which had not, because the first group stacked their things small and the second let lids wander off like it did not matter. She learned he had enrolled in a program because it sounded like a path rather than a person, had left because the man he was building there frightened him, and had come back with hands that missed wood. He described how oil seeped into grain and warmed under a palm and how sanding could coax life into a board that looked like the end of a story. She did not swoon or perform awe. She nodded the way someone nods at a detail that explains 10 other things. Near 4, the elevator opened to the lobby and placed them in front of Margaret, who stood with a stack of envelopes she did not need to sort as if the posture of order mattered more than the task. Her eyes noticed the vacuum in his hand and the spray bottle on Loretta's hip and returned to his face with a look that asked what picture he thought he was painting. He told her he had felt restless and that work helped. She told him some work sent the wrong signal. He asked to whom. She invoked prospective tenants and then, with the precision of habit, current ones. He said in a tone that suggested an elevator arriving at a floor no one actually wanted. She turned to Loretta as if addressing a reflection. The package for Ms. Singh in 4D had been misdelivered. It showed Loretta had signed for it, and Ms. Singh expected it by 5. Loretta explained she had given it to Robert while she was mopping. Margaret said she had checked and it was not there. Loretta said she would find it because that is what a person says when someone is building a narrative out of air. Margaret's smile carried almost warmth and exactly none. She said to see that she did. Loretta pivoted the cart toward the office. Caleb followed, not because she required support, but because he wanted his body present whenever the truth had to be located by hand. Robert looked up from checks with the relief of a man seeing a friend arrive at a table where he has been losing slowly. He told them the package sat behind the box labeled fan because the fan announced itself while the package did not. He told them Margaret had looked, seen space, and drawn conclusion. Loretta retrieved the small parcel like it was heavier than it appeared because she knew what it would lift from the woman upstairs. She checked the label, checked the time, and said she would take it up. Caleb offered to go. She told him no because if the package vanished between his hand and Ms. Singh's door the error would grow teeth and a name. He pressed the elevator button like he was doing something dignified. He held the door while she stepped in with the parcel and a face that did not waste anything on performance. Ms. Singh answered fast and signed with the relief of a person whose day had been missing one simple piece. Loretta waited for the ink to dry and returned to the elevator with a breath that did not call itself triumph and was exactly that. Back in the lobby, Ms. Larkin had arrived in a camel coat with a clipboard and the smile of someone who knows she has the power to say a room looks provincial. Margaret introduced her as if they were old friends rather than two people who traded in the currency of appetite and taste. The staging consultant suggested perhaps housekeeping could return later. Caleb said housekeeping was here now and that seasonal refreshes survive on daily labor, and that it would be inaccurate to pretend otherwise. Margaret told him they would not do this here, which he recognized as a phrase she kept in a glass case marked in case of disobedience. Ms. Larkin moved through the lobby with a tape measure like a divining rod, murmuring about neutrals and cohesion, while Loretta returned to the baseboards, placing her body between the wall and whatever theater needed an audience. Caleb fetched the small ladder from the closet that smelled like dust and questions. He set it beneath the chandelier and told his mother the bulbs fought each other. He pointed to the way the cool white undercut the warm, how the room felt unsettled without anyone being able to name why. Ms. Larkin declared him correct because she liked problems that could be solved by changing a detail rather than a worldview. Margaret told him to do it through clenched courtesy. He unscrewed the offender, found a match on the maintenance shelf, and when the light came back up it carried the kind of balance people attribute to taste but often belongs to wattage. Loretta looked up briefly from the baseboard and met his eyes. He felt the small current of approval and stored it in the place where hope lives when it is careful. Evening arrived one shadow at a time. Tenants drifted across the lobby with the smell of weather on their coats. Robert locked the office and pulled the chain. Ms. Larkin left with a list that would become invoices and the word curated. Margaret lingered with the patience of someone who expected the building to feel incomplete until she dismissed it. Caleb walked with Loretta down the service hall because habits turn into care when you practice them. At the back door, the glass held the hint of frost. He offered her the bodega soup with too much salt and the kind of comfort that comes from not cooking. She told him there was rice and beans at home that cost the same today and tomorrow and that she would eat what she could pay for twice. He asked if he could bring the beeswax and oil he made when his hands needed a task that calmed his head. She told him the banister would remain a banister with or without polish, but if carrying the jar made him feel like he was loosening something tight, he should bring it. She opened the door and stepped into a sky the color of steel. He watched until she slipped left through the gate and then felt his own lungs choose to move again. He returned to find his mother waiting with the kind of anger that preserves itself by choosing a contained temperature. She told him he had embarrassed her. He told her he had replaced a bulb and that the room would thank him if rooms could speak. She said he had chosen staff over his mother. He said he had stood beside the person doing the job that allowed her to pretend she was doing hers. She told him he was here on sufferance and should not mistake his last name for a set of keys. He told her the owner of the building she managed was the man she had married, and that whatever authority she thought she could pull like a badge did not exempt her from being seen. Caleb held the door and returned the nod with the easy respect of someone who had spent a day learning what a useful pair of hands could do. The lobby settled into the soft clatter of radiators and the pulse of the elevator. Upstairs, someone laughed in a kitchen with a light too bright for the hour. Across the street, a bus sighed. Somewhere 3 blocks away, a teenage girl shaded a jawline until it felt like bone. In a small kitchen that smelled like cumin and onion, a woman rinsed rice the way her mother had rinsed it, 3 times, until the water cleared. In his borrowed apartment, he set the pot hose cutting in a glass and placed it on the sill where whatever sun the building possessed would find it. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of a scar on the table that told a story without offering details and felt something settle in him that did not require explanation. He would return in the morning with the jar of polish and put it on Loretta's cart without asking anyone if it was allowed. If a new complaint appeared, he would ask for dates and names and the kind of specificity that lies cannot abide. He would not make a speech. He would not ask permission to stand where he had decided to place himself. He would lift on the 3rd step. He would keep the bulbs matched. He would be a pair of hands that made it easier for the truth to stay in the room. Morning came in pale bands across the lobby, the kind of light that made the marble look like frost. The jar of polish fit into Caleb's palm with the weight of something handmade, beeswax and oil settling into a soft amber that caught the sun even with the lid on. He set it on Loretta's cart the way a person places a note where it will be found without ceremony and stood there a breath longer than he needed, listening for the elevator's slow climb, letting the hum of the building find the same frequency as his pulse. Loretta appeared from the service hall carrying a bucket that had seen more winters than he had finished plans. She noticed the jar without breaking stride. Her hand paused on the handle for a blink, and then her fingers carried on with the habit of work. Only when she had set the bucket down and stripped her gloves did she reach for the lid, twist it, and tilt the jar so the light caught it fully. She dipped a cloth, tested a patch of wood under the rail beneath the mail slots, and worked in small circles until the grain lifted like a breath released. "That will do," she said, a low approval rather than a compliment. He leaned his shoulder into the banister and watched the dull spot warm. "It does not fix what time has done." "It does not have to," she said, folding the cloth so a clean edge met the finish. "It only has to help the next hand find a smoother place to hold." He wanted to tell her he had stayed up half the night trying to remember how the building sounded when he was small, how his mother's heels told the hour, how the elevator could be counted on to pause on the 2nd floor for an extra second the week after its inspection. He wanted to tell her there are sounds that do not leave your bones even when you think you have outrun them. The office door clicked. The shape of the day changed in that small sound. Margaret stood in the doorway with a manila folder held like a verdict. She did not look at the jar on the cart or the way the banister shrugged off its dullness near the mail slots. Her focus narrowed to the person she had woken determined to push out of a life she believed she curated. Robert hovered a step behind her, mouth set in the stubborn line of someone bracing for a collision he could not redirect. "Miss James," Margaret said, the politeness wrapped so tightly around the words they could barely breathe. "We need to talk privately." Loretta did not make a show of finishing her stroke on the rail. She did it because the work was small, and refusing to complete something incomplete always felt like leaving a dish unwashed at the end of the night. She straightened, set the cloth on the cart, and met Margaret's gaze without trying to pierce or soften it. "I am working," she said. "We can speak at my break." "This cannot wait," Margaret replied. She lifted the folder an inch, then lowered it like the weight had changed. She stepped out into the lobby and placed herself between the mail slots and the morning. "You have been repeatedly reminded about standards of conduct. Yesterday afternoon you left a locked service door ajar, propped open with a bucket. A tenant reported an unknown individual in the stairwell shortly after. This is a serious breach." Loretta's eyes did not flicker. "The door sticks. I lift and pull. I do not prop it. Anyone who uses it knows to let it latch." "You signed for a package on Tuesday that went missing," Margaret continued, flipping to a second sheet. "You were seen using the lobby inappropriately last week during your shift. These are not isolated incidents. This is a pattern. Effective immediately, your services are no longer required at Crestwood Manor. You will collect your personal items from the employee closet. You are not to return to the building after today without permission. If you are found on the property, security will be notified." Her voice stayed even, and that made it worse. It made it sound like she had not chosen this, but that the seriousness of order had reached an unavoidable conclusion and only she had the spine to say it aloud. Loretta did not reach for the folder. She did not plead her case in the lobby like someone begging a bus to return to a stop it had already passed. She folded her hands in front of her and let her breath move so that no part of her locked against the blow. "Did the report say what time the unknown person was seen in the stairwell?" she asked. Margaret blinked, thrown for half a second by the refusal to play the part she had written. "Shortly after 3. I was delivering Ms. Singh's package at 3, Loretta said. She signed. "Robert has the ledger. The package did not go missing. It was where someone did not look." A tenant emerged from the first-floor hall, keys loose in his hand, hair still wet from a shower. He saw the posture of the room and slowed without meaning to. The couple from 5C came from the elevator with their dog behaving like he had rehearsed calm all night and earned a treat. They sensed the static and waited, not yet pretending to tie a shoe, not yet excusing themselves with a smile that said they would not get in the way of something sharp. Robert stepped forward, ledger already open. "Miss Singh signed at 3:07, he said. "I logged it at 3:11 when Loretta came back down. The door alarm recorded a latch at 3:13. The only time the door was ajar yesterday was when the maintenance crew moved the dehumidifiers through at noon. The bucket was used to catch a drip under the pipe near the stairs. I set it there. No one propped the door." Margaret did not turn to him. Her jaw moved once as if her teeth had tested the strength of the words and found them difficult to chew. "Thank you, Robert," she said, and disappointment lived in the evenness. Caleb had not moved since she said effective immediately. The phrase took up too much space, like letting cold into a room. He felt the familiar rise of heat he had learned to tame at 13 when raising his voice added nothing to a house that had perfected the art of staying cold. He stepped once, not into his mother's space, but into the path between her and the cart where the jar sat with a ring of light on its lip. "On what basis are you terminating her?" he asked, careful with the pronoun, careful with the steel in the middle of his tone. "On repeated breaches," Margaret said. "On a cumulative failure to respect the standards that make this building what it is." "The standard that says the person who cleans must be invisible," he said. "The standard that says a complaint form with no name is heavier than a ledger with 3. The standard that says your certainty can substitute for evidence when the subject looks like the person you do not want the lobby to look like." "Do not make this about politics," she said, the word dripping with the disgust people reserve for the thing that might make them examine themselves. "It is not politics," he replied. "It is geometry. The lines you draw are straight. They do not curve to admit complexity." He turned to Loretta, not because he needed her permission to continue, but because he wanted to be the man who asked with his eyes even when the answer would not be spoken. She gave the smallest nod, the one that said the difference between help and interference is intention and listening. He looked back at Margaret and let each question land like a small stone placed exactly, not thrown. Who filed the complaint about the stairwell? Do we know? What did they see beyond shadow? Did they describe a person or a fear? Did they notice the sound of the latch or the echo of their own footsteps and decide it meant danger? Who said the lobby was used inappropriately? Did they say how? Was it the sight of a woman eating food that smells like a kitchen rather than a brand? Enough, Margaret said, voice tightening. You do not run this building. I do not, he said. But I live in it. And I am old enough to know that the building you think you run is a set of ideas dressed in fixtures. The real building is the one that keeps the heat on and the packages delivered and the floors from collecting what shoes leave behind. The real building is made by the hands you try to erase when the brochure photographer arrives. The widow from 2A had come into the lobby without anyone noticing. She stood with both hands on the head of her cane, listening the way a person listens when the room is trying to decide whether it will let truth be said aloud. Her voice came thin and sure. He is correct about the lobby light, she said, unhelpful and perfect. It has been wrong for months. The couple from 5C nodded vigorously, then looked like they regretted being visible. The dog sneezed in solidarity. Ms. Singh stepped out of the elevator with yesterday's opened package under one arm and stopped when she saw Loretta's shoulders set in the way shoulders do when they recognize an old routine. Is there a problem? She asked, the kind of question people ask when they are looking for permission to side with what they already know. Margaret inhaled and chose a new angle. This is not a town hall. Staff matters do not concern tenants. They do when you use us as the reason, Ms. Singh said, holding the package without brandishing it. She was at my door at 3. She waited for my signature. She helped me carry a box that was heavier than I admitted because I live alone and do not like to ask. If there was a stranger in the stairwell, it was one of your realtors who tailgate the service entrance because he did not want to wait for the buzzer. I have watched that trick since I moved in. Robert coughed to cover a smile that would make his day harder. Margaret looked at the folder as if it might sprout a path out for her if she gazed long enough. Finding none, she went back to the tone that had moved things all her life. This is not a debate. As property manager, it is my responsibility to maintain standards and protect residents. Sometimes that means making difficult staffing decisions. Loretta's fingers smoothed the edge of the cloth on the cart as if aligning it would keep something else from slipping. If you mean to fire me, say it straight, she said, not hard, not pleading. Do not make your fear sound like duty. The room tilted a degree toward her. The tenants did not cheer. They breathed differently, which is how rooms change when permission to be honest arrives. Caleb stepped fully between the folder and Loretta now, not to shield her as if she were fragile, but to place himself where certainty would have to climb over him. If you terminate her, he said to Margaret, you do it with a signed incident report that names an action and a person and a time you can prove. You do it with the ledger in your hand and the door alarms checked and the acknowledgement that the package you used as proof of unreliability is in Ms. Singh's hand because Loretta carried it there. You do it knowing I will speak with the owner about the risk this exposes you to when it becomes clear you acted without cause. The owner does not need a lecture from a son who drifted back and decided he could reinvent his childhood by meddling in his mother's responsibilities, she said, abandoning the even tone for one sharpened by fatigue and humiliation. The owner needs to know when management mistakes bias for prudence, he answered. If that sentence makes you angry, it is because it is not wrong. Silence held for a long breath. Robert shifted his weight. The dog sighed. Somewhere upstairs a pot lid clattered against a stove and the building made the sound of soup. Margaret closed the folder with a deliberate calm that reminded him of the way she used to lay a napkin over a plate when a child did not finish dinner as if the act could make the food disappear. Take your break, she told Loretta without looking at her. We will revisit this conversation at the end of your shift. Loretta did not thank her for the reprieve because it was not a gift. She nodded once to the room rather than the woman and pushed the cart toward the service hall. The tenants parted the way a polite crowd does when a person who has done nothing wrong needs passage. Caleb waited until he heard the rattling wheels fade before he set his gaze back on his mother with a steadiness he had not offered her since he was 15. "You do not have to like her," he said quietly. "You do not have to like me. But you will not insult our intelligence with paperwork that wilts under light." Margaret lifted her chin. The hint of color that had crept into her cheeks during the exchange had faded, leaving her with a kind of pale that might be fury or fear. "You will not speak to me like a board member at a meeting you imagine you chair. I am speaking to you like a human being in a building where other human beings live," he said. "You taught me the rules of posture and tone and which fork goes with which course. None of that is useful here. Here, the rules are simpler. Tell the truth. Do not invent trespassers. Do not fire the person who makes this place human because you dislike that her presence proves your brochure is a story and not a mirror." He left her with that because there was nothing else to add that would not cheapen the exactness of what he meant. He found Loretta in the service hall pouring hot water over a tea bag in a chipped mug the color of an old penny. The steam made the corridor smell like black leaves and warmth. She did not look up when he leaned on the opposite wall. She did not have to. "You are going to make your life difficult," she said, matter of fact. "It already was," he said. "I am only making it specific." She blew on the tea. "She is not done. I am not either." Loretta lifted the mug and sipped. He watched her shoulders. There is a moment when a person takes the first swallow after a shock and their body chooses to either accept the heat or reject it. Her body accepted. "At the end of the shift, she will try again with new words," Loretta said. "She will bring something she calls policy. She will bring a phrase with numbers in it to make it smell official. She will hope I will break or bow when she says trespass or disorderly conduct or failure to comply. She will bring those words," he said. "We will bring the ledger and the door alarm times and Ms. Singh and the widow and the dog and the bulb we changed so the room could stop lying in two colors." Loretta's mouth moved at the corner the way a person's does when the smallest part of their face does not believe in grinning and tries anyway. "You do like your sentences dressed," she said. "It is how I learned to be heard," he answered. "I am unlearning what to dress and what to leave plain." They finished the tea in a silence that did not need to be filled. The day resumed its rhythm because work does not stand still for people to finish their arguments. Caleb carried trash that needed carrying. Loretta returned items to their exact homes with a muscle memory that felt like prayer. Robert fielded a call from a vendor who swore the filters were on a truck that never seemed to reach the building. The couple from 5C sent down a plate of cookies with a note written in a nervous hand that said they hoped the sugar might help the air. Ms. Singh dropped off a mango she said was too ripe for a person living alone to finish and insisted someone take the sweetness away before it went soft. The widow from 2A asked if anyone knew a reliable handyman who could look at a drawer that had learned to stick. Caleb said he could plane the side and oil the track if she did not mind a young man with a borrowed toolbox. She looked at his hands and said bring the plane. At 5:30 the lobby reached that pause where the building decides whether it will wear noise into the evening or loosen its tie. Margaret came out of the office with the folder again. The set of her mouth said she had found a new sentence to hide behind. Tenants had not planned to be present, but buildings tell their people when to linger, and so the widow and Ms. Singh and the dog and the couple found themselves within earshot without admitting they had chosen a side. "Miss James," Margaret said, "as of end of shift, your access to the employee closet will be deactivated. You will return your keys to Robert. This is a final decision. If you do not comply, I will have no choice but to contact security." Loretta did not glance over to see if Caleb stood where he had promised. She did not check the faces at the edge of the room to measure whether she should risk speaking frankly. She lifted her chin a degree and set her voice where it would carry to exactly the ears that needed to hear it. "You will give me in writing the policy I have violated by name and number," she said. "You will sign it. You will let me photograph it. You will let Robert witness the handover. You will not add words later." "That is not necessary," Margaret said. "This is a private staffing matter." "It became public when you used the lobby to make me smaller," Loretta said. "And it became mine when you chose to turn disliking me into rule." Caleb stepped forward with the ledger open to the page that held a time and a signature in Ms. Singh's neat hand. "Before you threaten security," he said, You will read the line that says 307. You will admit the door latched at 313. You will acknowledge that Robert placed a bucket under a pipe and that someone who did not want to wait for a buzzer used the gap to excuse their impatience. You will say out loud that the package was not missing. Margaret looked at the ledger the way a person looks at a name that used to be theirs and is not anymore. You have no authority, she said, but the sentence lacked oxygen. The truth does, he replied. The widow tapped her cane. And your tenants, she added, voice thin but cutting, who pay for a building that knows the difference between order and cruelty. Miss Singh lifted the mango as if it were a gavel and then laughed at herself and put it down. The dog sneezed again and laid his chin on his paws to prove that not everything in the room had to be tense to be real. Margaret inhaled, the kind of inhale that tried to gather old power to reattach it to a moment that had loosened. She exhaled without finding all of it. Very well, she said, and the words cost her. We will review the incident reports with the owner tomorrow at 9. She glanced at Caleb and swallowed the name she had nearly said. Until then, Miss James will continue her duties. Keys remain as they are. No changes to access. Loretta did not sag. She did not smile. She nodded once in a way that made the air cooler and cleaner. I will bring the mop water to a boil and finish the third-floor hallway, she said. There is grit in the corner that will not leave if I am rushed. Margaret turned, and for a flicker too quick to catalogue, her face looked like a person who had been shown a mirror they did not expect to show as much. She went back into the office with the folder pressed flat so it would not crumple, and the door closed with less authority than it had when the day began. Caleb let the breath out slowly. He did not look triumphant. He looked like a man who had promised and found himself equal to the first installment. Loretta wheeled the cart toward the elevator and paused long enough to touch the jar with the back of her fingers. The beeswax had warmed to the room's temperature. He thought of what she had said in the morning about holding your ground and outlasting weather, and he realized he had been measuring his life by the wrong storms. He rode with her up to the third floor, pressed the button with the small ceremony she teased him for, and watched her step out into the hallway that had taught him as a boy how to whisper when a voice rose behind a door. She set the bucket down, ran the water until it steamed, and eased the mop head into it with a respect that suggested boiling water could be a kind of justice if applied patiently to the places that held on to dirt. He left her there with the steam rising and the sound of the mop dragging away what the day had left. When he returned to the lobby, Robert handed him 2 old keys on a ring. The metal was worn smooth by the memory of other fingers. For the supply closet and the roof, Robert said. You did not get them from me. But buildings change when good people can open doors. He took the keys. He did not ask why he would need the roof. He would find out. For now there was a banister that wanted oil and tenants who would sleep easier if the hallway smelled like lemon and heat rather than paper threats. There was a mother behind a door that would not open to him tonight. There was a woman on the 3rd floor who would finish the corner because leaving it gritty would be a loss she did not accept. He went back to his unit and set the keys on the table next to the glass with the pothose cutting, watched the root begin to unfurl like something convinced it might live, and understood that this was not the end of anything. It was a reprieve. It was a line drawn straighter than his mother's. It was an hour in which he had chosen a side and meant it with his whole posture. Downstairs the elevator sighed and settled. The matched bulbs kept their agreement. Somewhere in the building someone laughed at a joke that would not survive being written down. The day had been work. Tomorrow would ask for more. He felt ready in the way a person feels when the thing they feared doing has been done once, and the world did not end. The morning the meeting was set for, the building felt different before the sun had even risen high enough to paint the east windows. It was not a loud difference, more like the change in air pressure before a summer storm. People moved with the knowledge that something was about to be decided, even if they were not invited to the deciding. Conversations in the hallways carried the same tone as whispers in a church before the first hymn, low, measured, expectant. Caleb had barely slept. Not because he feared what was coming, but because he had rehearsed, over and over, the way he would look at his mother when the truth stood between them with no door left to hide behind. He had gone through the ledgers again, checked the maintenance logs, and even walked the service hall just to feel the weight of the place in his bones. Loretta arrived earlier than usual. She wore her work shirt ironed so flat it seemed new, and her hair was tied back neatly, as if she were meeting a dignitary rather than stepping into a lobby she had mopped 100 times. She did not greet him with small talk. Instead, she handed him the ledger she had signed at the end of her last shift and said, "Keep it close. They will try to speak in air. Paper keeps feet on the ground." By 8:30, the small conference room just off the lobby was arranged with the formality of a court hearing. The building's owner, Henry Alden, had arrived from his brownstone downtown. A man in his 70s who dressed like wealth was not a thing to be announced, only assumed. His suit was dark, tailored, and without the kind of gleam that came from newness. He greeted no one with more than a nod and settled into the chair at the head of the table. Margaret was already there, the folder in front of her like a shield she intended to raise the moment she felt outnumbered. Robert stood near the door, not as security, but as someone who knew his presence mattered. Caleb took the seat directly opposite his mother, refusing to let distance soften the lines between them. Loretta entered last, her hands empty, her eyes steady, as if she carried all the proof she needed in her own stillness. Henry cleared his throat and began with a formality that seemed carved from years of similar disputes. "We are here to address allegations of misconduct and to determine whether Miss James' employment with Crestwood Manor will continue. I have reviewed the preliminary reports, but I will hear from both parties before making a decision." Margaret was quick to stand. She spoke of breaches in protocol, of packages misplaced, of security doors left ajar. Her tone was measured. The way people speak when they believe their position is unassailable. She described a pattern of unreliability and incidents that put tenants' safety at risk. Each accusation landed like a pebble dropped in a still pond, designed to create ripples, even without weight. When she finished, Henry turned to Loretta. "You may respond." Loretta did not rush. She placed her palms flat on the table, a gesture that somehow grounded the entire room. "I have worked here for 6 years. I know every sound this building makes. I know when the elevator needs oil before the tenants notice the shutter. I know when the lobby smells like rain before the clouds show. I also know the difference between a real threat and a convenient story. The package was never lost. The door was never propped by me. The bucket under the stairwell was placed by maintenance, not to let someone in, but to catch a leak. There is nothing in my record before this week that suggests I do my job with anything less than care." She paused, then looked directly at Margaret. "This is not about doors or packages. This is about me not fitting the picture some people want this building to show. I am not invisible. I will not pretend to be." Caleb slid the ledger forward. "Ms. Singh signed for that package at 3:07, he said, directing the numbers at Henry. "The door alarm logged a latch at 3:13. We can account for her exact movements at the time the so-called trespasser was reported. That report came without a name, without a description, without a single verifiable detail, only an assumption. The same kind of assumption that's been made too many times in too many places, where people who look like Loretta are treated as suspects before they're seen as human beings." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Henry leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, using Margaret's married name, "is there any evidence beyond these reports? Any proof that Miss James committed the acts you claim?" Margaret's jaw tightened. "The complaints are from tenants," she said. "We have an obligation to take them seriously." "Yes," Henry said evenly, "but we also have an obligation to ensure those complaints are rooted in fact, not bias." His gaze did not leave hers, and for the first time that morning, Margaret's confidence faltered. Ms. Singh stepped through the open doorway then, mango in hand as if it were her ticket to speak. "I told you yesterday," she said, addressing Henry directly, "Loretta delivered my package. Help me carry it." There was no trespasser, just a man in a suit rushing to show an apartment who didn't want to wait for the buzzer. If you want to talk about safety, talk about the people you let in to sell the place, not the ones who keep it clean. The widow from 2A appeared behind her, leaning on her cane. "And the lobby light is fixed now," she added, almost as an afterthought, "because Loretta asked for it to be done. A woman who notices the wrong shade of light notices a door left open. You think she would ignore that?" Henry's eyes moved between the tenants, then back to Loretta. "It seems," he said slowly, "that the truth here is clearer than the paperwork suggests." He closed the folder. "Miss James, you will continue your employment without any mark against your record. Furthermore, we will be implementing a formal review process for tenant complaints to ensure they are verified before action is taken. Mrs. Whitmore, I expect you to see that policy enforced with fairness." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. She nodded once, but it was the nod of someone swallowing something bitter. Caleb met her gaze, not in triumph, but in the quiet acknowledgement that came when a battle ended without all the wounds being visible. When the meeting ended, Loretta did not thank Henry in the way some might expect. She simply said, "I'll finish the 4th floor now. The hall smells like paint thinner from yesterday's touch-ups." It was her way of returning balance, by doing the work she had always done, without fanfare, without seeking approval. In the lobby, tenants lingered. Robert grinned openly for the first time all week. Miss Singh handed Loretta the mango as though it were an award. The widow tapped her cane in a rhythm that might have been applause. Caleb stood a few feet away, watching as Loretta accepted their gestures without letting them become a spectacle. As she wheeled her cart toward the elevator, she caught Caleb's eye. "You kept your word," she said. "So did you," he replied. The elevator doors closed, and the building exhaled, a long, collective breath that had been held for too many days. Justice had been served, but it was not loud. It was not about punishment. It was about something more enduring, the quiet correction of a wrong, the reinforcement of dignity in a place that had tried to strip it away. And as Caleb stood there, he realized that was the kind of justice that left a mark you could not see but would feel every time you walked through the door. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that real strength isn't always loud, it's steady, it's patient, and it stands its ground even when no one is watching. Tap the like button so more people can hear stories that matter. And subscribe if you believe in stories where truth, dignity, and justice are not just words, but actions. In the comments, I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed someone quietly stand their ground and change the outcome for the better? Let's keep that conversation going, because these are the stories worth telling and worth remembering.